Hi guys, it's Wardy. I'm just going to present back to slide one. Okay, so sorry I couldn't be there today. There's a question that what is Sydney Commons Lab? Is it a network? Is it for existing businesses? Is it for people who are inquiring about the Commons? Is it an Australian version of the Preston model? Anyway, to kind of assist this group to work through that process, I'm going to suggest that we look at what we're trying to do. In the economy and in psychology, there's these sort of hierarchical group of needs. And where cooperatives and the commons focus is in this shared space, in the base level needs that people have for safety, for security, for economic resources, food, shelter, energy. And the cooperative principles have been well defined and operate internationally. You can't be a .coop and have anything other than democratic member control or concern for community cooperation with other cooperatives. So what is a co-op? Well, it's one of many member-owned organisation types. A co-op would enshrine these principles and democracy, meaning one member, one vote, and would enshrine this idea of primary activity for the cooperative and an active membership that aligns with that primary activity that each member must engage with. The most common sort of co-ops at the moment are local co-ops where neighbours are getting together to form renewable energy co-ops, or platform co-ops where people who've got a similar job like graphic designers or photographers can come together online and compete against the VC-backed platforms, or you know, a combination of both platform and local would be something like Beehive down in Bendigo in Victoria. So when you're talking about small businesses, ones you do on your own, you're really talking about partnership or sole traders. When you're talking about involving many people like a community, you're really either talking about a corporation or a cooperative. And they're very similar. So each of them need to raise invoices and pay payroll and make payments and get customers and, you know, employ staff legally. What changes though are a few fundamental differences between a co-op and a corporation. And one of those is the sort of startup journey for a company is you have an idea, you go to ASIC, you spend 25 minutes and $400, you have an ABN, you share that equity with somebody and you're now co-founders, and you hire other people on Sweat for Equity and you formulate your business plan. It doesn't work that way with the startup co-op. Instead, before you can lodge and get your ABN, you have to have a really thorough plan and understand your active membership test and your financials and your rules and what the primary activity of the co-op is. And so it takes months to a year and costs the same, but takes longer. So that pre-formation period is sort of the valley of death for co-ops, if you want, because if you don't have that right, you don't have a form. Whereas companies, they form so easily, they die so easily. So when we say share in a co-op, it's different to share in a company. A company share has a capital gain. It can go up or down. It carries a dividend, and each share carries a vote. When you're in a co-op, the number of shares is irrelevant. Your membership carries your vote. And what is more, if you put $1,000 into a cooperative share, you can get that $1,000 back when you leave as a member. And so the way that the cooperative share exists in financial terms is that it's withdrawable by the members who are the owners. And so it's not really considered an asset, even though you account for it the same way. And they very rarely pay dividends if there's a surplus and it's a distributing cooperative. They tend to distribute back to members rather than to shareholders. So, you know, I just mentioned the word surplus, and that's distinct from profit. So in a company, the goal is, whether it's a B Corp or the worst corporation in history, it's to maximize shareholder value. And that means creating margin which means suppressing costs and charging as much as you can, and getting dividends, because in theory dividends set the capital cost of the shares. In co-ops, after a year of trade, if the trade has been successful after paying all of the services that members have needed and wanted, and there's a surplus left over, that can go in one of two ways. Either it can be, if you're a distributing co-op, distributed back to members, usually as a kickback, like if you were selling milk or wheat into a local co-op for $1, and there was a surplus, and it meant you could get 3 cents extra for every litre of milk or tonne of wheat that you'd delivered, then that would come as an extra bonus by being part of the business. If it's a non-distributing co-op, that surplus is just returned into improving the mission. And so there are a lot of great examples of older non-distributing cooperatives that have built assets that today's members are benefiting from the longevity and assets built by members before them. So, you know, the difference when you've got shares that are linked to capital and incentives means that directors are responsible to shareholders in a company, and for employees they try and align those incentives using commissions, if it's a sales environment, using options or employee share ownership. You know, in cooperatives, the directors are there to represent the members and to maximise member benefits and services. Not necessarily are they better employers rather, or better providers of customer service. That all comes down to culture, but they will serve their members, whoever that stakeholder group is. Of course, they could be a multi-stakeholder cooperative. But generally speaking, culture is the central thing that makes a difference when it comes to outcomes. There are good companies to work with, and there are bad co-ops to work with. Both can exist. The other thing that comes down to it is, you know, a company is governed under a different set of laws. The most commonly used laws, like of all the ABNs, say there's 1 million in Australia, 998,000 of them are for companies, and only 2,000 ABNs would be allocated to cooperatives as we sit here in 2019. And the Corporations Act governs the companies, and the Cooperative National Law governs the cooperatives. And essentially you're back to democracy, one member, one vote, as opposed to one share, one vote. And the differences in time that it takes to set up. And that's largely due to you've got to have such a detailed financial plan that the registrar will accept it, and that 5 member directors are willing to put their fiduciary responsibilities on the line in order to even get your ABN to start your co-op. So you have to be quite a mature concept to be a co-op and govern yourself as a co-op. You don't have to be for a company. What is more, annually, ASIC, which governs the Corporations Act, is set up for companies. Your annual lodgements as a co-op are generally still state-based, and they tend to be more complex, more paper-based, and you know, as a result of not teaching cooperatives at a tertiary level for 30 years, we have fewer accountants, lawyers, and professional class who understand cooperatives compared to accountants. So the relative availability of good advice and governance in co-ops is harder to find. So that's a bit about co-ops, but let's understand incubators, and we will understand incubator co-op a bit more. So an average incubator in Australia, and there are about 120 of them, some sector specific, some are agnostic, some are backed by large corporates, but all of them essentially don't have a financial model because their startups are pre-revenue typically and don't have money to pay for the top-down expertise that is provided in incubation. So a sidecar fund generally pays for those experts in residence, program managers and support teams to take a cohort of startups through an incubation process, and the resulting graduation night is essentially the best deals on the table in that sector or from that incubator for investors to then put their money in. And so most incubators are essentially deal flow and qualifying deal flow for investors in their mandate to invest in startups. And they don't necessarily serve the incubatees. They, by necessity, serve the sidecar funds that pay their salaries. So there's a whole bunch of differences that happen in an incubator for a company than would be necessary for an incubator in cooperatives, not least of which an incubator for cooperatives can't use a cooperative's capital or sweat equity the way that a company can. Okay, so we've decided to crowdsource rather than do the top-down version of incubation, and that means that our members of Incubator Co-op develop a profile, tell a bit about themselves, can start or join groups, which are essentially one group equals a project. They can find friends and they can gather around the projects that they feel inclined to help, and that helps those projects go through the stages that they need to go through. As any group initially forms, there's high enthusiasm, but as the rubber hits the road, you've got to go through the process of getting specific about, well, what do you mean? Let's take an example. A renewable energy co-op for a community sounds like a great idea, but when you get that community in the room, you realize that some people think you're talking about new solar installations on the Scout Hall, and other people think you're talking about using the solar on their domestic house. And other people think you're talking, if you're talking renewable energy, about wind power. And so that storming phase enables you to nut out, well, what is the actual objective of this renewable energy co-op in our context for our people? And that leads to norming and ultimately performing, but it takes time. To assist, Incubator Co-op has got this sort of 4 stages of form, organise, fund and operate. Now I could go into detail about each of these stages, but I guess it's important to know that you don't have to do them in a linear scale, like one after the other. They can be done concurrently. But if you don't do all of these things, it's unlikely that you'll develop a cooperative which is ultimately sound and formed properly and organised properly and funded appropriately and ready to operate. So, we help with getting financial projections done for your business and your business plan, doing the research around, is there a product market fit? There's business planning and co-op rules builders that we have access to through Incubator Co-op and our relationship with Get Mutual and the broader co-op sector. And we encourage sort of thinking, which is around, if we're a crowdsourced community, we want a social media type environment where everybody can pitch in. Whereas you'll still find most incubators and most organisations are sort of got a mailing list and send out on a weekly basis or scheduled basis or monthly basis in a one-directional kind of email talking at people. Well, co-ops need to form and then they need to operate in a distributed communications manner. So, the big issue with the 3 to 12 months that it takes for a co-op to form is that, people have to work and put time and effort and skills and expertise into the formation of this business plan and investment thesis and, operational thesis and what's your member value proposition and how are our rules going to handle X, Y, and Z scenarios. But there's not an organisation there for them to take equity in, and in a co-op, the equity has very little value relative to your membership. So we thought, wouldn't it be nice if we did live in a perfect world where you just had an idea and it worked, you negotiated it and you were away. But time changes things and you end up with a lot of founders disagreeing, a lot of startups not meeting, previously imagined targets. And so you think, okay, well, let's nail this down and put it into a heads of agreement or a more formal contract, but that ends up employing lawyers. So our idea was, well, what if all of our members at Incubator Co-op could operate under an evolving treaty and renegotiate as changes come through? until they get to the point of clarity. And if they reach this point of clarity where the concept has gone through form, organise, fund, and it's now operational, and it's a cooperative, and it has members, and it has fees, and it has clients or customers, and it's generating revenue, well, then now it has the opportunity to pay for that work that was done in the pre-formation stages before it was an entity. So a treaty will, remain current until it hits that threshold point where it might start paying its dues to people who helped in the pre-formation. By mutual agreement, project team and a project might decide it's the wrong time. Let's just resolve it through mutual withdrawal. Or it could be broken, and I'll go into that in a second. Or better yet, you do the pre-formation work, you get a co-op established, and then it's able to pay for the work that was done in the pre-formation stages. So you convert it from a treaty to a contract in law, becomes legally binding, and the legal costs for doing that should be significantly reduced because the terms of the contract should be a mirror of the terms of a treaty. So what happens if one of our members in Incubator Co-op who is committed to doing work for a project doesn't do or deliver what they said they were going to do? Well, unfortunately, this isn't a legally binding contract. It's a morally binding agreement from members to members, but there is enforceability. So if you make a treaty between a project and an individual member at Incubator Co-op and then it gets broken, members can be expelled. So if a contract is, used to assign risk to one party or to, give expectations of risk between the parties, a treaty is a tool for the negotiation of risk as time progresses. So within Incubator Co-op, we've got project to founder treaties, project to service provider treaties. You'd use these if you need accounting or legal or design or IT or other assistance. Project to volunteer treaties can articulate whether somebody isn't getting paid but their costs might be covered, or isn't getting paid and they want to be recognised or don't want to be recognised for the work that they're doing. And so crowdsourced incubation works because our members work on those idea stage cooperatives, helping them go through the 3 to 12 months it takes to form and a good idea and be lodgement ready and get their ABN. And invariably, some of those project ideas won't go ahead, but the ones that do, that are covered under treaties, can use those treaties to show, hey, these are the resources we've got committed, and that helps them attract more resources. Or if the treaties are out of order, it'll put people off. And so treaties become a great measuring stick as to the maturity of an idea as it's progressing through crowdsourced incubation. The idea by having an incubator co-op that is a co-op itself, helping to form new member-owned organisations, is that we'll create a future that is everybody's business in a literal and pun-based sense. So apart from that presentation, Tarinya asked me to tell me tell her, and by extent anybody watching this, what my thoughts were. My thoughts are that, there's a relationship between Incubator Co-op and Sydney Commons Lab. If Sydney Commons Lab has individual members or a network of individuals and they come up with ideas, well then I think they should come into Incubator Co-op to help form those ideas into enterprises. And at the other side of those cooperative enterprises might be another network that Sydney Commons Lab organises, which is for businesses as opposed to individuals. And so you get that sort of metaphor of a hamburger. Hope this was okay, not too fast, not too boring, and look forward to your feedback.